everyone, and welcome to our podcast series Sci-RO Tells, an avenue of Sci-RO to feature STM professionals from India to share their story with our members. I am Sonam Pandey, a Research Development Officer at Center for Stem Cell Research, a unit of INSTEM Bangalore Christian Medical College campus, Vagayam Vellore, Tamil Nadu, India, and an active member of our current Sci-RO leadership team. Today, I will be hosting the third episode of Sci-RO Tales for the year 2024. It is my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Vineetha Raghavan, who is the trained scientist and more than 13 years of experience in research management and administration. Dr. Raghavan obtained her PhD in life science from International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, Jawaharlal University, New Delhi in 2004 with a specialization in plant virology. After completing 6 years of postdoctoral training in the field of protein biochemistry, virology, and cell biology at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, New York, and Yale University School of Medicine, respectively. She returned in India in 2010 and joined the Research Development Office at the Bangalore Life Science Cluster as a grant advisor. She currently heads the grant management and research collaboration team of the Research Development Office at iBRIC-inStem. Her responsibility include strategic grant advice, pitch development, operational management, process development, grant management, research partnership development, agreement negotiation and management. She is also actively involved in outreach to different funding agencies and in organizing and participation in the grant writing, funding, science career workshop. Welcome, Dr. Vineetha.
Thank you so much, Sonam, and thank you to Sci-ROI for inviting me for this podcast.
With this, I will start our your journey in this podcast. While there are so many things we want to get you inside on, I would like to get a start with knowing a little bit about your academic and the professional journey.
Thank you, Sonam. You've already given an introduction about my academic journey. I did my PhD from International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology with a degree awarded by the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. My topic at that point of time was plant virology, and then I moved the usual academic route. I went in for postdoctoral training in the US, and I spent about 14 months in this institute called the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, and then proceeded to a second postdoc at Yale University School of Medicine. Together, I got training in protein biochemistry, virology, and cell biology. And after close to 6+ years of postdoctoral training, I returned to India in 2010. And at that point of time, the Research Development Office was a very binary concept. It was, I felt it was very interesting to have be part of a dedicated office which was staffed with professionals who were trained scientifically and could act as a liaison with all stakeholders such as PIs and leadership, administration, accounts, HR, and also external stakeholders, collaborators, funding agencies, etc. And I thought this was a very interesting profile, and it was a very unknown entity. It was a pioneering concept in India at the time, and I thought it was a great learning experience. And over the years, I came in with absolutely zero experience in research management. And over the years, I have progressed in getting the required expertise, mostly with on the job training. And slowly and steadily, I've moved to a more leadership role. I started as a grants advisor, and now I have a more leadership role. I head the grants management and research collaborations at the Research Development Office at the iBRIC-inStem.
It is very interesting journey as you shared. So I know that when scientists or academia person is starting their early career grant writing, so with that time they have a lots of question in their minds. On that basis, I'm just asking that can you explain the key component of the successful grant proposal to our listener who is drafting their first proposal?
Sure. I think if you look at any grant proposal, I mean, the formats change based on the funding agency requirements. But if you look at the basic bare bones of a grant proposal, there are three components that I see. One is, of course, the technical content, which is actually the meat of the proposal, the work that you want to do, right? And then there is a budget, which is the section where you would ask for the funding to do the proposed work. And then there are other supporting documents which vary according to the scheme and the funding agency requirements. Now, if I go into the details of it and I break down each of these sections, I think the technical content, I think, should cover overall the following. There should be something which says about how the idea originated, what was the rationale of the proposed study, what is the current status of R&D in the subject area, and then of course then define the specific objectives, the methodologies that you would use, and the outcomes that you anticipate coming out of this project. Now if I break down each of these further, then I can say that there is an introduction section. Now, the introduction section will start with highlighting the background of the research or the origin of the proposal. It would mention the gaps and importance and necessity of your research topic. It it is important at this point of time that when you're writing an introduction, you can tend to deviate, but you should only mention focused information. And at the end of the study, where you build the background to why you want to do this research, you define the study aim and objectives. Then there is a section on literature review, which will be where you are talking about what is happening in the field, what is the gaps and the importance, right? So when you're talking about what is out there in the R&D in this particular field, so that is where you develop the foundation which is laid in the introduction. And here you mention the critical outputs and contributions of previous studies, and you add your own critical review of the literature, and always keeping the research questions in mind. Once this is done, this is basically the background to the research that you propose to do. Then you go to the objectives, which is actually the nitty gritties of what is it exactly that you want to do, right? And here you would mention the broad objectives and the key hypothesis. Would divide the broad objectives, if possible, into three or four specific aims, and which should be very specific. That will be serving as an evaluation criteria at the monitoring stage. So you have to be very careful when you define the objectives for your grant proposal. Then we go into the methodology, the work plan about how is it that you're going to achieve the proposed objectives. Here, this is where you will talk about each of these objectives and how these will be addressed. You would explain the rationale behind the choice of the methods, which is supported by research, basically some kind of preliminary data if available. This is where you would also mention what are the facilities and infrastructure, labware, and other capital intensive needs for your project, right? This is also important because if you're proposing some experiment, for example, or some technique or which requires a certain equipment, it is important to say whether you have it or you will have to go and access it from some other location, right? And also a time schedule of activities, which will give the milestones through a bar diagram or a Gantt chart, which basically breaks down your entire research project into these silos of times, where you will say that, okay, this is how I've planned out. If it's a 3-year research grant, this is how I'm planning to do, and this is the first 6 months I will do this, and based on this the next 6 months I'll do that. And that would be in a visual or a pictorial representation of your entire proposal, right? And at that point of time, again, depending on what scheme you're applying for, there would be alternate strategies, which are basically fallback options. Say your certain methodology does not work. Have you thought of any alternate strategies? Now, this I am talking about as a very broad overview, and this, of course, changes depending on what scheme you're applying for. It can be more or it can be less, right? So, but what the bottom line here is that if you're writing a grant proposal and expecting it to be successful, it should be intellectually and conceptually challenging. It should have a coherent strategy, and the proposed work should be feasible, right? Within to be completed within that proposed duration of the fellowship, with defined timelines and milestones. So this is where you need to give a lot of thought to say that, if I'm saying that I will do X, Y, Z, do you think it is possible within that time frame that you're not saying that you have a very ambitious plan which the reviewers who are looking at your proposal know that will take 5 years, and you're saying you're going to do it in 3 years, right? So that is something that you have to do a balance what you're proposing to do. Now, in terms of, so this is basically how you develop your technical content, which is basically the meat of your proposal, right? Then, supporting to that is the budget. What is it that you are asking for? What do you need to accomplish these objectives? And what you have to be careful is that the budget should align with the guidelines of the agency that is funding the project, and it should neither be under resourced or over resourced. So, you have to be careful about what you're asking for. Hmm? So that's another aspect. So while you're developing your proposal, you should also develop your budget accordingly, right? And then the third aspect of it is the other supporting documents, and these could vary. These are, maybe institutional endorsements. You need your institutional authority to sign off on the grant. There could be letters of support from mentors or supervisors or the institutional authorities, bank details if it is supported, where should the money be transferred, and they might have undertakings that are required, and this varies according to the agency. So basically what the underlying here is that there may be less or more number of supporting documents, but you should give yourself sufficient time to obtain all the supporting documents. So I think that's in a nutshell about what you should do in the key components of the successful grant application.
Nicely explained and in detail. Hope the listener who is listening in right now that they will definitely get the point whatever you said. So in the continuation of this grant writing, definitely you maybe also notice that what kind of the common mistake people are making when writing the grant proposals.
I think, Sonam, the most common mistake that people make when they're writing grant applications is not planning sufficiently in advance and preparing the application in advance. Because really speaking, the proposal is an idea which has needs to be honed over several iterations. That you should, incubate in your mind and think about the proposal. What is it that you want to do, and what is the other research in the field? Is it something that you should do, or is it been done already, right? So these are so you have to plan really well in advance, and not when the a grant application deadline is announced, right, or a grant proposal is announced. So the other common mistake I think is also uh, careful consideration of the subject area of the proposal, and it may or may not align with the remit of the scheme. So it is important to do some sort of a background research on the funding agency and read the scheme guidelines carefully to say that, what I am trying to propose, the subject area, is it in alignment with what the funding agency is looking for? So that a bit of background research is crucial when you're writing a grant application. And the third thing I would say is that the methodology that that you propose, the work plan that you propose, should always align with the stated objectives. So these are some of the things that I think are common mistakes that people make, not willingly, but these are some things that happen unknowingly. And I think that is where planning sufficiently in advance will help.
Nice. I think that will be given a brief knowledge about the common mistake people are doing. So in this, again, in the part of this writing, there is a very important part that is budget. Budget for the grant is a crucial part of the grant writing. So, what are the common budget related mistake to avoid in the grant applications?
So I think one of the tips I would like to say to avoid budget related mistakes is to use Excel sheets when you're developing budgets. So it makes your calculations very simple and error free. So that is one thing that I would advise to avoid common budget related mistakes, that you use Excel sheets for developing the budget and not put it in a Word document. I think I have seen that happen, and that only leads to errors. The other, of course, is that when you're budgeting, you should make sure that whatever you're budgeting should is aligning with the scheme guidelines. And what I mean by that are when you read the guidelines very carefully, you should have a very clear understanding of what you are allowed to ask for and what you're not allowed to ask for. So allowed versus disallowed cost is something that you should carefully read. For example, if I look at early career fellowships, we're talking about postdoctoral fellowships, for example. Many of these fellowships will not allow equipment, right? Or they may not allow you to recruit personnel in your grant, right? So those are the, if it's a fellowship application, the major component of it is the fellowship of the awardee and a little bit of contingency or research grant. Though necessarily, because postdoc grants are usually mentored grants, many of these agencies do not allow procurement of equipment or recruitment of any manpower. So that's just an example of what is allowed versus disallowed costs, right? And the budget should be as per the actual requirements, which is based on the objectives proposed, and it should be within the prescribed budget cap. So that is important to know what is the total quantum of funding that the funding agency is willing to offer, and your budget should always be within that cap. So that is another thing that one should be careful of. And the other thing is that when you're so the broad headings when you make a budget, what you would generally encounter are consumables and travel and contingency and other costs like facility access costs, for example, right? So the budget should be broken up into budget heads, and they should be these budget heads that I mentioned, and they should be provided under broad subheadings, and not a very detailed list. Not many of the agencies do not ask for these detailed lists. So what I mean by that is, say for example, you are saying that you do tissue culture work, right? So you would say you would need tissue culture consumables, and you put a block amount there. You do not go into the great details of whether this is a petri plate or whether it's a conical flask. All those kind of details are not required. So just put it under a broad subheading, like for example, tissue culture consumables, and then put a block amount there year wise based on what your requirement would be. So that is, I think, some of the budget related mistakes that people make is to sometimes give too much information, too much breakdown, which is not required by the funding agencies. So I think in terms of the budget, these are some of the pointers that I wanted to share with the community.
Yeah, correctly. I think people are not focused more in the objective, whatever they want to achieve during their writing. They are mainly focused in the budget, and that time they give a more information which is not related to. I think so, right? And you are explained very nicely. But I think when people are writing the first time grant, they have a so many challenges and hurdles also there. So could you please also give a brief address this kind of the challenges when they are writing the grant proposals?
So I agree, Sonam, that when you're writing a grant for the first time, you have absolutely no experience writing a grant application. That itself is a big challenge, right? And what I we feel is that many early career researchers, because they don't have sufficient experience, they sometimes struggle to define the specific objectives and the respective milestones. Now, this is very crucial nowadays because the funding agencies are increasingly being stringent in terms of what is it that you're proposing to do and how you're proposing to approach that problem. So, it is very important, and many of these are now crucial for reporting and other aspects, and it is now being regularly asked by the Indian funding agencies. So, if you're looking at uh, writing a grant proposal, and I think the biggest challenge is to do this defining of specific objectives and the milestones associated with each of these objectives. And I think that comes with experience, and if that is something that needs to be honed, I think best is to talk to your supervisors, talk to your peers, and talk to people who have already passed this hurdle and have been successful in getting a grant of their own, and they will help you to try and define what are the objectives and what are the milestones. How do you define milestones for a particular objective? I think this is very important. And I think one thing that lack of experience also is that they struggle to make that application, and they revise it, rework it, and then they leave it for the last minute, the submission. And that is actually a biggest struggle because they are not able to time time it well, so that the struggle is real when it comes to last minute submission, because they are sometimes not able to submit because there is server congestion, or there are other technical glitches on the funding agency portal, and that is putting yourself at a disadvantage, because you are not accounting for these last minute glitches that can happen. And that is also because they have not experienced this, and it's the first time they're experiencing it. They're not aware that can be issues with a portal, right? So I think these are crucial, I think, the challenges that I think have applicants have faced while writing grant applications.
You have explained very nicely about the challenges and their solution also. So I think there is a so many tips also there, but I'm asking few tips for the successful writing this grant. So what tips do you want to share with our listener to improve their grant writing skills?
So, Sonam, I think, grant writing, of course, is a skill that is acquired over the years. But I think I can share, based on our experience, a few tips that I can share with our listeners. The first most important tip is to have a research idea in place well ahead of the grant application deadline. Don't wait for a call to be announced before you start thinking of what you want to do. So always have one or two ideas which are in a stage where you can write them up, right? So always have a research idea in place well ahead of the application deadline, because these calls open for maybe a month, maximum 1.5 to 2 months. That's not sufficient time for you to hone your research idea and present it well to improve the chances of success, right? And the other thing I think a useful tip is to have the proposal vetted, and vetted by as many people as you can, by mentors, by peers, by your seniors, by people who are outside your field, because they will look at it, at your proposal, in a very different perspective. And if you can convince them that what you're doing has some value, then I think that's half the battle won, right? So have the proposal vetted and read by various people, get their feedback, and that is important. That will help you hone your research idea, and do some background research on the funding agency to which the application is to be submitted, because you need to be very careful to make sure that what you are proposing is within the remit and within what has been funded in the past, within what the funding agency would like to fund, right? Now, I think I have a few points specifically for the presentation style, and that is where people struggle. It is actually the writing part of it, right? So the one of the tip I would like to share is that the use of abbreviations and acronyms should be minimized as much as possible. And if you are using acronyms, then you should always spell out all the acronyms on the first reference, right? Because when you are writing up a proposal, you have an idea of what you are meaning, and you're used to using that acronym or an abbreviation. But a person who's reading your proposal may not be from your field and may not be familiar. So it's always important that if you're using any acronym, always spell out in the first reference, and make your points as direct as possible. It is a test of how clearly you can write and not how beautifully you can write. So there's a difference there. We are not looking at whether you can use big words. I would say that, write simple and clear sentences. That is what is more important. Avoid technical jargon, and proposal should be clear and free of contradiction. That is where external eye would help, because you are saying something, you should not down the line say something that is somewhat contradicting what you said in the first place. So this is where, somebody who is not involved in the proposal writing, reading that, can give you an input. Is there any kind of contradiction, right? The other tip I would say is use active rather than passive voice. And what I mean by that is, say, it's more assertive to use an active voice. So say that we will develop an experiment, say, and not an experiment will be developed, because the active voice is much more assertive, right? And it is induces more confidence in the reader. Be consistent with terms, references, and writing style. So, make sure that if you're writing everything in third person, write everything in third person. This is just an example, right? So that the writing style should be consistent throughout your proposal. Avoid typographical errors, misspellings, grammatical mistakes, sloppy formatting. I can assure you that anybody who's reading a proposal which has all of these already puts them off, and you're putting yourself on your back foot here. So give yourself a best chance by doing a grammar check, doing a spelling check. And there are so many free online tools now available, such as Grammarly and others. I'm sure the community knows better than me in terms of what all online tools are available. Use them to make sure that all of this is corrected, so that a person who reads it finds it comfortable to read your proposal. And when you're done, just allow someone with fresh eyes to read your content. It takes care of a lot of the things that I have mentioned above. Whether we have used acronym without giving it a reference, without spelling it out in the first reference, have you used too much technical jargon, are you contradicting something? All of this, if someone who has not been involved in a grant proposal can read and give you feedback, that will help you just kind of take care of many of these issues. And then again, like I reiterated earlier, also do not leave the submission for the last minute. If possible, submit at least 1 to 2 days ahead of the deadline. This is to avoid any delays due to server congestion or technical glitches, because there have been instances that I know of where people have not been able to submit because of technical glitches, right? And if you do that at the last minute, there's always a high possibility that these these are the ones that will prevent your submission when you've put in so much effort in getting the grant application together.
You have listed so many tips. Hope listener will use this and this will be helpful from them. So with this, I just want to know, because I heard and I also, or maybe our listener also noticed, that sometimes organization need or they get more grant as compared to other. So definitely they have some strategies. So could you also explain what ongoing strategy can organization implement to improve their grant writing success rate?
Since we are targeting the listeners, I assume are more early career researchers. I think many early career researchers writing grant applications, like I said earlier, also have very limited experience in grant writing. And this is where the mentors have to play a very active role. Mentors who have written grant applications before are the ones who can give crucial inputs into guiding the early career researchers as they prepare their very first grant research proposal for their grant application. So I think role of mentor is crucial as they develop the proposal, right? So have active discussions and get mentors involved. In terms of organizations, I think organizations can constitute a committee of experienced faculty who can pre-screen the applications to give constructive feedback, which can play a role in improving the success rate of the application, right? So if there is a committee which is a bunch of experienced faculty, so the onus of reviewing and giving feedback is not only on the mentor. The mentor is the first point of contact, but there can be a group of experienced faculty who can give feedback, right? And that will help, of course, the success rate to improve. Um, in addition to that, of course, there can be training that can be imparted by the organization. So organizations can impart hands-on training to early career researchers in grant writing, where experienced faculty can provide guidance to the applicants in developing their grant application. And of course, successful grant awardees can share their personal journeys to success and give useful tips on what worked for them. And believe me, if you're an early career researcher, you listen to another early career researchers who has been successful in getting an grant application and a grant award, and if they share their personal journey, they can connect better. So I think these are some of the strategies that an organization can implement to improve the grant writing success.
Nice. I think best way to whatever our guide or mentor, that will be more helpful to other strategy. I think so. But yeah, organization strategy also helpful for the improve of their grant writing and get the grant from the funding agency. So with this, I just want to know right now currently. People are using so much AI tools, so there is some trends also in our now era. So I just want to know, is there any emerging trend or changes in the grant writing landscape that applications should be aware of?
Yeah, I think you've already said. I think AI tools, there's an increasing use of AI tools in finessing and writing grant applications that I think is an emerging trend. The other aspect that I see the agencies being very vigilant about is check for plagiarism. So, plagiarism check is another aspect which is increasingly being requested by funding agencies. So there are many funding agencies which will ask you for a specific undertaking about whether you have checked for plagiarism. Of course, they will do their own internal checks as well, but now they are asking, they're putting the onus on the applicant itself to do the plagiarism check and inform them. In terms of, I think, funding agencies and trend for funding, I think in the Indian landscape, translational and multidisciplinary projects are emerging as trend for funding. So I think that is something that is, it's not like a single PI driven grants. It is more of networking and multidisciplinary projects which are becoming a trend nowadays.
Okay, so for that, how might technology impact the future of grant writing on these aspects? That it means upcoming trend in the grant writings.
So yes, I think AI tools are very, very powerful. So AI and ChatGPT, they are the emerging technologies that are coming up rapidly as a solution for grant writing. Now, if they are used judiciously, they can have a huge impact in improving the communication of the science in the grant proposal. So sometimes people struggle. They have an idea in mind, they struggle to present it coherently, and it's not, what they have thought of is not what comes on paper. And here the AI and chat gpt tools can possibly help you finesse your communicating that idea, right? But of course there's always a flip side of it also, that chat gpt can be misused. AI can be misused for falsification of data. I mean, the kind of output you get from these AI tools is amazing, but do we know whether it has been fact checked, whether it is correct, whether it is in line with what you want to do? So AI and Chat GPT cannot be a replacement of your intellectual input in writing a grant application. So that's another thing that one might consider when you're using technology, a judicious use of the technology to help and not falsify.
Yeah, I also agreed with you that technology might be helpful, but not people can use for they lost their intellectual if they use this kind of the AI tools or all those things. So with this, last but not the least, what suggestion do you have for our Sci-RO community?
So first, I think Sci-ROI community is doing fantastically, and what I would encourage is the early career researchers in the Sci-ROI committee to actively plan and prepare for writing grant applications. Now, why should you write applications? Of course, it is very necessary to secure funding for personal support and research. But in addition to that, it is also a fantastic opportunity to demonstrate independent thinking, to hone your research ideas and to gain experience in writing research proposal. Now all of these, think of it as an investment which will play a crucial role as you move progress to more independent positions. So this is something that I encourage the ROA community to actively pursue. And I would also say keep abreast of the latest developments in the research areas as well as the emerging technologies, because things are changing at a very rapid pace in this world. So keep abreast and don't get left off. And then get feedback on your work by actively participating and presenting in national international conferences. Network extensively, because within the scientific community, that is where you get fantastic feedback on your science. You get ideas, you can generate ideas, you can generate collaborations, and that is crucial, especially given the trend of funding agencies to support more interdisciplinary and transnational science. It's not something that you can do alone. It has to be a collaborative effort, and these are networking extensively will really provide you the opportunity to get collaborators on board and develop something, a fantastic idea which kind of uses complementary expertise from you and somebody else to come up with something fantastic. So I think network extensively, and I would just wish the Sci-ROI community all the very best. Happy writing.
Thank you, Dr. Vineetha. As we end the current episode of our podcast, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to you for your vital contribution. Your thoughts, knowledge, and the unique perspective have definitely enriched our podcast. And I am appreciatively for the depth and clarity you had added to our conversation. Your willingness, your share your experience and knowledge with our listener has been very inspiring, and I'm confident that they will find immense value in our in this podcast. Thank you once again for joining us and for being a part of this enriching conversation. Thank you, Dr. Vinita.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks to our listeners. We are ending this episode with a promise to meet again soon with another episode of Sci-ROI podcast.